I consider puppetry a theatrical art form first and foremost, and I think it should appeal to everybody. It seems in a lot of the cultures nowadays that marionettes and puppets in general are looked upon as only children's entertainment. But I don't look at it that way. And so my shows have been, I would say, 95% have been all adult audiences that I've been performing for, sophisticated audiences. And I even started working in nightclubs in Europe as well. And that's pretty much where they found me when I was first offered the work, with the film being John Malkovich. This is Maxine. She is a portrait marionette, of course, of Catherine Keener in the film. Her character was Maxine. You can see the type of movement that the puppets can give. One of the most important things, of course, is the head movement, because the focus of the marionette is prime importance. They're focused on where they look. So when I'm working the marionette, I see through her eyes. I see what she's seeing at any given moment. And of course, I try and think what she's thinking as well. It's very interesting. I just received a phone call out of the blue saying that there was somebody that was putting together a movie that needed marionettes. And they wanted to come and visit us. David Alexander and myself were living in Pasadena, California. And my workshop was my garage, where I was building the puppets and developing the acts and things. And so they asked to come and see all of those things. And it turned out to be Spike Jonze, the director of Being John Malkovich, K.K. Barrett, who was the production designer, and also Vince Landé, who was one of the producers. And I have no idea exactly how they discovered us. I suspect that we had sent a videotape to Francis Ford Coppola because he was doing a film about Pinocchio, supposedly. And we thought he might need a marionette operator for that. So later I found out that Francis Ford Coppola had been given the script by Charlie Kaufman of Being John Malkovich, and then he passed it on to Spike Jonze. So I think that he also may have given this videotape of our work to Spike as well, and that's how they found us. Then they gave me a script, and I went, wow, I just didn't know how to react, because this script was unlike anything I had read before. It was so off the wall. But I was fascinated by the fact that the puppetry in this particular film was really important. It was crucial to the dynamics of what happened in the film. It seemed that the puppeteer was revealing his inner thoughts at the beginning through his puppet work. These were his hidden thoughts from everybody and his emotions. And then later, you would see that because he was such a good puppeteer, it influenced all the things that happened to him later in the film. And so that was really important to me, because before, when puppets were in a film, they tended to just be a gimmick. And basically, Spike was offering me the job right on the spot. But the difficult thing is, he said they wanted to start principal photography in about 3.5 weeks' time. I would have to train the actors so that they would look good holding the puppets, so they learned how to work the controls. And then I would have to work out all the movements that they had to do in the film, which I really didn't know what they were yet. And when they were shooting principal photography, I had all these other commitments already set up. I was working frequently on cruise ships, and I was working in Europe. I was working at the Lido in Paris, and then all these other shows that would be happening around within the United States as well. So my time was pretty limited. And when we started negotiating, he said, well, listen, I want you to be an advisor on the film. So I did. David and I came in and we sat in on brainstorming sessions with Spike and all of the people connected with the film that were trying to decide how they would do things. And so most of the ideas that he used for the marionettes came from those brainstorming sections. But I said, basically, I don't have the ability to create the marionettes in this short amount of time. And he also wanted to shoot the marionettes in between the live sequence, working with the live actors and going into another section where he would have the setup for the marionettes to perform. And he just wanted to walk over there, and then I'd quickly do the scenes with the marionettes. And when we started discussing it more and more, I said, these scenes are very complicated. You really need to focus entirely on those. They should be done after you do principal photography with the live actors as a separate thing. But anyway, finally I had to turn down the job. And it was really sad for me because I really felt like this was a right direction for me. But I went off and I did all of the things that I had to do in Europe. And through the grapevine of puppeteers, we hear what's going on with other puppeteers. So I was hearing that they had done a huge cattle call for this film and had probably several hundred people that came to audition as puppeteers for the film. And of course, as I said, any puppeteer that worked a hand puppet or anything else would come in probably and audition for that film. But it turned out they didn't use anybody from the cattle call. And they found a company in Northern California called Images in Motion.
Are you going to take it out?
They made lovely puppets, so they decided to hire them.
There's a wonderful man who we miss all the time. His name was Mike Osnowitz, who is the father of Frank Oz. And Mike knew everybody, was heavily involved in puppetry. He was a puppeteer, an amazing story in and of itself, but he actually was very instrumental in me meeting Spike Jonze to discuss the puppets with him. They wanted somebody to create a likeness of the actors that were more realistic. A lot of marionette characters are very stylized and very caricatured and cartoony, and they wanted something more realistic. And because I, as a sculptor, tend to do a little bit more realistic, and I'm not, it's just not real, they're slightly stylized, but they didn't want it to be, cartoony. So that's why I got the job, I believe. That was part of it.
And she had just finished doing Spice Girl dolls.
Yeah.
She was specializing in tiny celebrity faces.
Yes.
She has the ability. She's one of the, I would say, foremost.
Well, not so much now.
Face sculpt. Well, we don't do.
Not so much now because everything's gone digital.
Yeah.
So I had to learn, you
but
either.
20 years ago.
Well, 20 years ago, yes, I was doing a lot of dolls. I did a lot of different celebrity dolls and caricature.
So, he'd seen those, and I think that was also a big part of, and then also the fact that we agreed to a ridiculously short time period and a ridiculously low price for all the work, but we really wanted to do
Honestly, I think what happened was everybody else turned them down also because of the time frame.
Yeah.
The time frame was insane.
Yeah.
And subsequently, because of the time frame, we did not have time to really rehearse or anything. We were literally stringing those puppets when we got down there.
Somebody said once that we were opportunistic puppeteers, and I do believe that's true. People, somebody will say, can you do this? And I'll turn to Kamala, and Kamala will say, sure, and off we go. And then we had Lumen Code come in from Canada, wonderful puppeteer marionettist. So he came down and he did a lot of the stringing, and we had a whole team working on these. But the timeline was really tight.
We had under 2 months to do this. Basically, it was 7 weeks really total, 6.5. I think we pulled off a minor miracle, frankly. And I'm very proud of the look of the characters. I think they're very distinctive. They're very unique. I think it captured the essence of the actors themselves. And that's the one thing when I sculpt, you have to have a certain connectivity with creating something, a certain emotion that goes into it. And I do try to infuse that into whatever I'm doing. There has to be an emotional connection. And even today, with all of the technology and the digital aspects of the whole industry, sometimes I think that often gets removed. I still think the human hand and the human touch on something and sculpting something is very powerful.
6 months later, I get a call from Spike, and he's saying, I want you to do some work on the film. And my immediate thought was, oh, he wants me to come in to do sweetening, just to do little moves with the puppets that they would cut to after they've done all this other filming that they were doing. I said to Spike, well, you know, I didn't make these marionettes, and I was used to only working with things that I had made myself, so I knew they were good working tools, and I knew exactly the ins and outs of how they worked. And I said I would be comfortable with the marionettes if I could view them and see how they worked. So he sent me the marionettes they had used in the film, and like I said, they were beautiful portrait puppets created by Lee Armstrong and Camila Portugues from Images in Motion. But the design of the bodies was all wrong for the types of actions they want. He sent me a videotape of the Dance of Despair and Disillusionment done by John Malkovich and his stunt double, because it had all these acrobatic moves in it.
John Malkovich is a consummate professional. I would say he's extraordinary. My name is a difficult name. Camila Portugues is not a very common name. And the next day we're passing, and he says, good morning, Camila, how are you? And then he also would dine with the crew. You know, that kind of thing, I think says a lot about the man. But he was also just incredible to watch. He's an amazing performer.
You're making him weep, but you yourself are not weeping.
And he was interested in how
yeah,
to do it.
he was lovely, absolutely lovely, and he wanted to learn how to hold it, and we tried to guide him in that arena, and so we worked with him. And then the Dance of Despair, some of that was reshot, but they were having the marionette do things that marionettes don't naturally do.
And I had originally said to Spike, what you need to do is build the puppets, find out what they do best, and then have a choreographer use all of the movements that they do best in a choreographed piece. But they didn't do that. They created this outlandish acrobatic piece. And I said to Spike, basically, you've used every move that people think are impossible or very, very difficult to accomplish with the marionette. And here they are, all put in one dance number. But I said, I think I can get all of those moves except for the forward somersault and the back handspring. He said, oh, no, we have to have the forward somersault and the back handspring. I want Craig Schwartz to be the most amazing puppeteer you've ever seen. And I said, well, I won't promise it because as far as I know, it's impossible to do with a marionette. But I said, I'll do my very best to come up with something. So they allowed me to work for several weeks with all of the marionettes. And Spike, at this point, he was no longer working. Of course, he had finished all the principal photography of being John Malkovich. So the actors were all gone and everything. And he was working on another film called The Three Kings in Arizona. So he would fly from Arizona and come back to visit me in Pasadena in my garage and see what I was doing with the puppets. And then he would comment about certain things, and then I would say, okay, we'll adjust this and that and stuff. And that went on for a couple of weeks. And he said, as soon as you're ready, let me know, because then we're going to rent a studio and we're going to start shooting all of the puppet sequences. Basically, he was prepared to listen to anything I had to say at that point, because what I discovered is he had, of course, shot all the marionette sequence, and for whatever reason, he wasn't satisfied with it. He didn't think it came up to the level that he wanted. So he was redoing everything. And I finally felt I was ready. I hadn't discovered how to do the forward somersault and back handspring. There was one stunt double puppet that was created just to do those moves. And then it came to me just 3 days before we went into the studio. of how to do it. I could just see it in my head. And I restrung the puppet on the simplest of controls. It was just 2 pieces of doweling. And I would have my arms in like a contorted position when I started the move, and I would have to slide strings out of the way as the forward somersault would happen. When we were on the set, we noticed they had a video guy with his whole setup, and as they were shooting pieces of the opening, he would be back there editing, and it looked like he was editing into some other pieces. And I was going, oh. And then I realized what they wanted to do is they wanted to edit my performance into some of the performance that they already had. But things weren't flowing right. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But what it ultimately came to was that they just tossed out everything, and I completely reshot. And that took about 5 days to shoot all of the Dance of Despair and Disillusionment. And the only tricky part that we did in that you would say was a camera trick was that I couldn't get the puppets to stop frozen after running into a position. And so I suggested that I would start the puppet in the pose and I would reverse it and get him to his original starting point. And Spike liked that, and we shot a take with it, and it looked too perfect. It looked a little bit mechanical, so then I had to add just little tiny extra wobbles or something to it. And then, when they reversed it, it looked great. You couldn't tell that the puppet had, so he could stop dead in his tracks. And then we went ahead and shot the little love scene. And those were the 2 scenes we shot. It took a little over a week to do them. And Spike was so happy with those scenes. He thought he had it then. And we went off and we thought, okay, I finished my work on the film. And 2 weeks later, I hear from Spike and he goes, we've written a whole new scene for the film. After seeing the work that you've done, Charlie Kaufman has written a scene. It's called the Abelard and Heloise scene, and it's going to be done on the street.
While we enjoy the pleasures of an uneasy love and abandon ourselves to fornication.
So then they had to arrange to have John Cusack come back for a day, and I worked on the set with John, and they were doing all distance shots on the set, and I had to recostume the puppets. I didn't make the costumes, they had a costumer, but I had to help them, because with marionettes, you can't use fabrics that you would use on humans. It has to be fabrics that drape and are very soft so that it conforms to the look in miniature that would be a duplicate of the larger one and allows them to move. The interesting thing is, of course, when directors start out, they think they're going to direct puppets exactly as they direct humans. And you can't be too nitpicky about it. Spike, the very first day that I was working with him, I would do a take and he'd go, no, the hand has to be this way, not that. And I'd go, okay, well, I need to adjust the string. I need to put it in a different position so that I end up with it like that. And so I'd go off and I'd change the string. Well, they'd all have to wait while I did that. And he found out that it was really a waste of time to be that nitpicky about it. You just, when you got something that had that movement to it and that heart to it, you didn't worry about little things with the hands and things like that. So by the time we got to the Heloise and Abelard scene, I felt really, really comfortable with these puppets. And that's now my favorite scene in the movie, because that's where I see the real thought process and the heart between those 2 characters on film. And I'm working both of the puppets at different times when they're solo on the screen. And when there's 2 puppets on the screen, I'm working whichever I think is the principal puppet, and my partner David Alexander is working the other. So we are basically the 2 puppeteers responsible for all the marionette work that appears in the film. But it only took us 2 days to shoot that scene, and it was great fun. On the street with John Cusack, it was a little bit more of a challenge because he had to get punched every time. And when he got punched, what he would do with the puppets was unpredictable. Sometimes he would just drop them, but one time he took them and like threw them up over his shoulders, and they hit a brick wall behind and slid down. And I was really concerned about the puppets because they had eye animation, and the eye animation had broken in Maxine, and so she just had blank eyes. You couldn't see it because they were shooting from across the street. It was all distance shots. But John Cusack had no idea that we were doing close-ups the week after that. So I mentioned something to Spike. I said, I think we may have to delay the close-up shots because the puppets are being roughed up a little bit here. And John Cusack heard me say that, and then he was a little bit more careful with the puppets. I think he thought, they were just props at that point, that it wasn't going to be too he wasn't going to be concerned about whether or not they were damaged, because they would have lots of time to fix them if they needed it. But anyway, I redid all the things in the puppets I had to shoot that scene. And it, like I said, it's my favorite scene now in the film. And when we finished that scene, I thought, okay, now I'm done with the film. And then it was probably another month after that, Spike calls me up and he says, I need one final scene way towards the end of the film, and I want it to be the Craig puppet dressed in a Japanese kimono, and he has a little sword, and he's going to commit suicide. And Spike just came to my garage, and we set it up in a situation in the garage where he could shoot with a handheld camera, and I had a smoke machine because he wanted it all kind of smoky and dreamy. And I set up the smoke machine going, and then we shot that last scene, and it amounts to like 2 or 3 seconds that happened way at the end of the film. But again, it was to relate to what's happening in the thought process of the character of Craig Schwartz at that point.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Malkovich. It's the MS. Really, John Malkovich.
To quote Mike Osnowitz, Mike Oz is puppetry is the poor stepchild of the arts. And you are an actor. You are a performer, and you have to go through the same motions and the same type of practice and rehearsal you would as an actor. Although I think it's 10 times harder, because you're taking an inanimate object and trying to imbue it with the same sort of emotions that an actor can just stand up and do. So it is an art form. So I think that's one thing that people think, and also they'll just say, oh, puppets, oh, you must love children. Well, this was what was so fantastic, is being a part of an adult product, an adult film, something with pathos and using puppets. That was thrilling, because I do like puppetry for adults, and I've seen some brilliant stuff around the world, and I think often in the United States we get stuck in a particular style and genre of puppetry that is very narrow.
Most of puppetry in America is for children.
Yes.
And that's great.
That's fine,
it is fun to do, puppet shoots for that audience, but it's, you see it in Europe where there's so much more adult puppetry done.
Oh, the frustrating thing to me was that I was booked again in Europe when the film was finally making its debut. So I couldn't even go to the opening in New York City. And my partner David was able to go, and he was able to meet Charlie Kaufman. I never met Charlie Kaufman. Charlie lived only a few blocks from where we lived in Pasadena, and we didn't know that. But I wanted to meet him, and I wanted to ask him all these questions about how he came up with the script. And I wanted to know, because in the script, he basically has everything that a puppeteer, that happens to a professional puppeteer when they're growing up, dealing with other people about the way they react to puppets. They treat puppets are kind of like the stepchild of theater. He knew all of those things, and I wanted to know where he was exposed to that, how he was so in touch with the put-downs that puppeteers have to endure. But the thing I liked, of course, as I said, is he respected the art form enough to realize that within the film, Cusack character working through Malkovich becomes a famous puppeteer, a world-famous puppeteer.
People fail to understand how much work goes into creating that illusion. And that is what it's all about, is that illusion of life. Whether it's an inanimate object such as a cup to a figure that is representative of a person. So, but it is an art form. And I've always tried to do the best I can in it, and I'm very proud to be part of that community of puppeteers and being part of the film itself. Not knowing that it was going to make the impact that it has, the longevity that it has had, and just being part of a Charlie Kaufman script. I mean, come on, it's like, he's fantastic.
And what I like is the film has opened up puppets to a whole new generation that never knew, especially about marionettes. Of course, young people know all about the Muppets, about hand and rod puppets, and so young puppeteers nowadays always want to aspire to be a Muppet puppeteer. But people didn't know what marionettes were, a lot of them that would see the film. So I'm so happy that that film inspired people and also exposed this art form to a whole new generation.